This is China, and this is Indonesia. But did you know for a little over 100 years there was a self-governing Chinese polity on the island of Borneo? Allow me to introduce the Lanfang Republic. Predating both the Republic of Ezo and Republic of Formosa, the Lanfang Republic technically was the first republic in Asia and remained independent more or less until Dutch occupation in 1884. So why were there Chinese down in what nowadays is a part of Indonesia in the first place? Well, during the 18th century, the sultanates of Sambas, Sukadana, and Landank over in western Borneo needed laborers to work in their lucrative gold and tin mines. And if there's one thing China had, it was plenty of laborers. As hundreds, if not thousands, of Chinese streamed in, including a significant number of Hakka, members of a Han subgroup found primarily in southern China, various Gongsi or companies were created to supervise business matters. These Kongsi also mediated interaction with local entities like the sultanates, provided some basic social services, and importantly, protected their workers. The founding father of what came to be known as the Lanfang Gongsi was Low Fong Pak, sometimes also called Luo Fangbo, a Hakka from modern Guangdong province. Back in China, Lo had tried becoming a scholar. Unsuccessful in this pursuit, he packed up and relocated to western Kalimantan sometime in the mid-1700s. Oh, and just a quick word about Borneo itself here. Kalimantan nowadays refers to the Indonesian portion of the island, which constitutes about 73% of Borneo. The island's north, aside from a tiny sliver, well, two enclaves actually, that comprise the independent nation of Brunei, however, is controlled by Malaysia, and is known as East Malaysia. That being said, in Indonesia, Kalimantan can also, and indeed often does, refer to the whole island of Borneo, which, fun fact, is the world's third largest island. Anyway, Lo quickly made a name for himself among overseas Chinese on Borneo, and there are even legends about him being able to ride crocodiles like horses. If that's true, I think I might need to rethink what I'm doing with my life. He soon established the Lanfang Gongsi and relocated the company to Mandor, modern Pontianak. However, shortly after this, a conflict broke out between the Pontianak Sultanate, an important commercial and trade center, and the Mempawah Kingdom. The Sultan of Pontianak, also known as Kun Tian, was a man called Abu Laman, and seeking allies, he asked Lo for help. The source of the conflict, as explained to the company leader, was a dispute over a palace the Mempawah Kingdom wanted to build in the Sultanate's territory. Some sources, however, claim the conflict started because of Pontianak itself. Either way, since this was also near the newly established Lanfang Gongsi, Lo agreed to support the Sultan in his war against the Mempawah. And together they were able to defeat the kingdom. However, Mempawah then allied itself with Dayak tribes upstream, Dayak or Dajak being a somewhat loose term for indigenous people from central and southern Borneo. Lo, nonetheless, was able to defeat the Mempawah and their newfound allies, pushing them back to Singkawa, a city that belonged to the Sultanate of Sambas. Defeated and with no other recourse, Mempawah signed a peace treaty that greatly increased the power of the Lanfang Gongsi. Following this, overseas Chinese from other parts of Borneo and even Sultan Laman himself would, in time, seek protection from the Lanfang Gongsi. And in 1777, Lo proclaimed the Lanfang Republic and was himself elected as the republic's first president by popular vote. With its capital at Mandor, the Lanfang Republic continued to maintain a relationship akin to a tributary state with Qing dynasty China. In reality, however, Beijing didn't confer any official status to the self-proclaimed republic and continued to view the polity as a Gongsi. That being said, the Lanfang Republic predates both the United States and France by roughly a decade, and of course China itself, which only became a republic 150 years later in 1912. While the Lanfang Gongsi exercised little control beyond the mines that most Chinese worked in and was compelled to pay tribute to local sultanates, as an independent republic, Lanfang no longer was beholden to the various sultanates on Borneo and even boasted its own minister of defense. Though it had no standing army, the republic had a national militia that was manned through means of a conscription-based system in which military service was mandatory. Lo almost certainly could have proclaimed himself a sultan if he wanted, but instead preferred a democratic model of government with certain prerequisites, like the president and vice president of the republic having to be ethnic Hakkas. In 1795, Luo died and Zhang Wubao was elected as the Lanfang Republic's new president, a position that roughly a dozen people would hold until 1884. A bit of an interesting side note here, but high-ranking officials of the Republic often dressed in traditional Chinese clothing, while the lower-ranking officials dressed in more Western-style clothes. And speaking about the West, in enter the Dutch. Dutch ships first arrived in the region around the late 16th century, however the European powers' influence was, for the time, still mostly limited to Java. In 1819, conflict occurred with the Lanfang Republic when the Dutch East India Company tried expanding its reach to include Borneo. This was the start of what came to be known as the First Kongsi War, or the 1823 West Kalimantan Uprising, and saw a number of peoples, including the Chinese, rise up in opposition to Dutch expansionism. Following a punitive campaign which targeted Mandor, among other places, the Dutch emerged victorious and consolidated their presence on the island. Nonetheless, 30 years later, in 1854, the Second Kongsi War broke out. A 2,200-man strong expeditionary force, supplemented by another 1,700-man strong secondary force, under the leadership of Augustus Johannes Andresen, landed at Sambas and Pontianak in Kalimantan. The coastal port city of Singkawang soon fell, and while the majority of the area was now under Dutch control, Lanfang and two other Chinese Kongsi still did not capitulate. However, after the fall of Fort Kulor on May 26, the Chinese surrendered. The only Kongsi not fully dismantled after this conflict was the Lanfang Republic, which was given a quasi-autonomous status by the Dutch. Lanfang was still able to elect its own leadership, but the Dutch would hereafter have to approve of those taking office. On October 23, 1884, however, the Dutch controller, a term used for district officers, alongside a number of his aides, was killed in or near his home. Following this, Chinese insurgents helped by the Dayak launched a number of guerrilla-type attacks on Dutch patrols in the still technically existing Lanfang Republic. And this marked the start of the Third Kongsi War, or Mandor Rebellion. Effectively, it was a last stand of the Republic, however Dutch officials described the rebellion as being orchestrated by gangs and petty criminals. Defeat here saw the former Lanfang Republic now effectively incorporated into the Dutch East Indies. Officially, though, the Netherlands did not annex the territory because it hoped to avoid difficulties with Qing dynasty China. When that dynasty was overthrown and the Republic of China founded in 1912, however, the Netherlands officially annexed the territory. Following the downfall of the Lanfang Republic, many Chinese left Borneo to resettle elsewhere. Of course, Chinese people can still be found in modern Indonesia and today make up the fourth largest overseas Chinese community after Thailand, Malaysia, and the United States. Interestingly, there is still also an unrecognized government in exile called the Provisional Government of the Lanfang Republic, based out of Manchester's Chinatown. What's more, the Provisional Government has seats in the Chinatowns of Liverpool, Newcastle, and Birmingham. Established by Ho Sui Bin on March 22, 2012, it does not recognize Indonesian rule in Western Borneo and, among other things, wants the Netherlands to pay reparations to help build a multiracial society where the Lanfang Republic once stood. I'm going to give the Lanfang Republic a 4 on the Ghost Countries Index. Although its historical impact in Indonesia seems limited nowadays, there still is an ongoing legacy of the overseas Chinese community elsewhere in Southeast Asia, particularly Singapore. But as always, feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comments section. Also, a huge thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon, and if you'd like to help support the channel too, there's a link in the description.